Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of our Rise Leadership podcast. It's great to be back with you, and it's great to be back once again with you, Felicia.
Likewise.
And today we're going to be doing something a little bit different from where we've been in previous months. We're actually just going to be having a chat, aren't we, today?
Yep.
And we're going to be talking a little bit about your history in leadership and just journeying through your story, what you've learned, how you've grown, how you've been challenged, and what wisdom you have to share with us today as well. So I'm really looking forward to this. And before we go any further, I'm going to just give your book a little plug as well. So if you haven't yet got your hands on a copy of Felicia's book, The Invisible Leader, you must do so. And I'm sure you can find a copy of that in all good bookstores online as well. So I definitely recommend it, one to read through. And I'm sure we're going to touch on some of the parts of what you've recorded of your story so far in this book as well. So obviously, we've been doing this for a few months now.
We have.
A few episodes.
Hard to believe, really.
And so I feel like we've probably been able to glean from some of your wisdom already in some respects. But just give us a little bit of a potted history, as it were. Give us a taste of your journey up to this point with leadership and what that's looked like.
I think it's interesting because it started way before I would have called myself a leader. And so even sort of, being chosen to lead sports, be captain for this, that, and the other at school and everything else, and just starting to see that pattern. And when I finally even sort of got to the teenage years and started to look for a job, as many of you do, just a part-time job, I got into working for, it was in retail, and I got into working for what was then Littlewoods. I don't even know if they exist anymore. That's how old I am. And just started there as a sales assistant, but very quickly they decided that even though I was only working Saturdays, they wanted to promote me to being a senior sales assistant. And so I just found myself going through, as I started to work and engage in the world of work, started to find that I was put in places of influence. And I guess so that was probably one of my first leadership roles, and it was quite significant at the time, because I often had to manage people who were younger than me. And I wouldn't say that I was the most gracious of people at that time. And then I went after university. I had another bunch of retail jobs, but I guess my first job as what I would call a leader, and I knew it, was when I was working for a law firm. And I stepped into the role of really sort of what they called practice manager. And it was there that gave me quite a lot of a training ground. And I mentioned that a lot in my book, and some of the pitfalls as well as the good things. Yeah. And then really went on from there to lead teams, particularly consulting teams internationally, and learning how to lead in different cultures, because that's a different element again, all the way to sort of then working with governments and working with government leaders, and how that shapes things. Working with politicians is quite an interesting journey. And then I guess full circle now back to law and working in that space.
Yeah. So you mentioned how you can, even looking back now, you can recognize that journey starting long before you would have called yourself a leader, even to your childhood. What were some of the sort of traits that now looking back you could see in yourself, even as a child perhaps, that you might say, that's something that marked you out as a leader?
I'd say, especially at school, to be honest, I was always in trouble. And that might sound strange, but often it's the case that young people who haven't got that leadership gifting and energy tapped just, use it in the wrong way. And I was often, like I say, I was either fighting at school, or overly talkative, or trying to instruct people for what to do, and things like that. So those were starting to be signs. And in fact, I've been so blessed. God's hand has been on me. I realized that looking back, even before I knew him, to be honest, and to see how he put certain people in my path that really made a difference. And when I was younger, I remember being in trouble for something or other, again, at school. And a teacher of mine saying, do you know what? There are two ways you can do things. You can lead people into a ditch, or you can lead them somewhere, useful. And I don't think, at the time, I just listened to it, it's like, yeah, whatever. And I didn't really understand it, what he was trying to say, that you've got influence and you need to, to be intentional about how you use it. But I was a child, so who knew? I was just like, yeah, okay, whatever. But I started to see that as I got older, in that I would do things, good or bad, and people would follow me.
So even then, you can see there are people around you are seeing something in you, noticing that there's leadership on you and in you, and just beginning to kind of challenge that a little bit and call it out and shape that around you as you go as well. So that's really interesting. So you talk a lot, and we touched on this in our first episode of the podcast where we talked about being called to leadership, and this is a big part of your book. When did that penny drop? That leadership is something that you are called to, not necessarily something that you might only aspire to, but there is a calling element to it as well.
I think it's a really important topic, this one, because it kind of goes hand in hand with the sort of nature-nurture piece. And so when we talk about being called, I'm not necessarily saying that it's about, okay, you're a born leader. There are people who are born leaders. You just see it on them and whatever else. And there are others who grow into it. But the difference with being called is whether you are a born leader, as we think about it, or a leader that's grown into it, the calling is the Lord's. And I think that's the difference. So when you ask, when did I know it was a calling? I had to know the Lord before I knew it was a calling. And it took me a long time to get there. I mean, I'd been in and out of church as I grew up, and I wandered away from church. I was very disillusioned, in my 20s, and at university did my own thing, was not interested at all. And then they got to a point in my life where some things were not going very well, and I still just couldn't see my way through. But what was really interesting is I went to a friend's wedding, and the Lord encountered me there. I mean, I love weddings. I absolutely do. The joyous occasions and everything else. But I actually felt the presence of the Lord there in a way that I hadn't done, like when I was a child. And it was so clear and so tangible. And in coming back to the Lord, I mean, I wept. I mean, I went to the back of the church and I was sobbing. And it was so much repentance and recognizing, gosh, I'd just stepped outside of his will and that I hadn't been in the place that he wanted for me and whatever else. And as I went on the journey of discipleship, it was through that journey that I started to realize he had this calling for me into leadership. So it went hand in hand with my faith journey and my walk as a disciple.
So there's a really interesting dynamic at play there, isn't there? Because what you're describing is that first you needed to follow before you could really lead in the way that God had called you and made you to lead. I think that's a really interesting just thing to catch hold of and recognize, isn't it? That I guess in all of us there's a sense that for any good leader you're a follower first.
Yes.
And I think that's no more true for any of us, is it? So since coming back to God and I guess moving into that position as a follower, what difference has the faith element of who you are made to your leadership journey?
It's been progressive, let's put it that way. Because there's so much that we learn about leadership from the world around us, and it took, and as you start to move in your faith journey, or at least for me, as I started to become more discipled, I started to recognize that there was some differences between the way in which the Lord leads or expects or would like us to lead versus the way the world does. And so it's, how it's shown up in my leadership is by questioning, for example, some of the ways I might have done things in the past. So I talk about in the book that I used to think that if you can't change the people, change the people. Yeah. And I used to be quite quick to do that. So if we were having difficulties in an organization with people, it was quite simple. We just get rid of them. That was kind of my approach initially, which is so counter to sort of faith, which is about being long-suffering and bearing with people and having grace and those sorts of things. And in the early days, I didn't have any of that. So I had to learn it. And so a lot of my faith walk, has impacted my leadership for the better because I've learned into those key things that we've talked about over the series, like humility and integrity and service and so on. And so that's been very much progressive as I have sought to become more like Jesus in my walk and in the things, in the way he did things, the knock-on effect has been that it's improved my leadership.
So have there been occasions, I can imagine there have been occasions where as you've sought to grow in your discipleship and become more like Jesus and to lead like Jesus led, have there been occasions where that's rubbed up against a culture within an organization that you've been part of? And what did that look like? How do you navigate those moments?
Yeah, quite often actually, and it is difficult. And I think sort of the first time I did it, I encountered that. I really second guessed, should I do this, should I not, and whatever else. So it was many years ago when I was a lawyer and I was working for a firm, and we did legal aid work then, and you were supposed to bill. Lawyers bill by the hour and things, and you're supposed to bill for the work that you've done. And we had quite a difficult client who we were finding that we were ending up spending lots and lots more time than anticipated than the original cost estimate. And it came to the monthly reconciliation, you bill for what you've done, and I had a boss that sort of suggested, we know that this man is going to come back, before the month is out, and we're billing ahead, so just add in that money. And it was like, well, we don't know, he might not, and even if he does, we're supposed to reconcile to today, so that will require me to falsify some dates. Yeah, but it's not a big deal, it's minor, because he's a lot of trouble and all the rest of it. And whilst I understood where she was coming from, the question is that I'm not going to write on an official form that goes into government or at any time dates of things that have happened and make it up, because it's a lie. Yeah. And I had to stand my ground and say, no, I'm not prepared to do that. And it was like, if you want to do that and you want to sign it, that's up to you. But I am not actually prepared to do that. And she was quite irritated, to say the least. But it was that's my personal integrity that's at stake. It's not just about whether the firm was going to make money or lose money that month or whatever. It would help with sort of, cash flow. It's not my concern. My concern was that I had to stay true and authentic, to who I profess to be as a follower of Jesus.
And were there any ramifications from that? Was there anything that came back your way? Describe to us kind of the cost of taking that stand.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, not very pleased, and it did impact our relationship. Up till that point, we'd gotten on quite well and everything else, but after that, it was very much she was arm's length. And when we were looking at being allocated work, I didn't always get the best choice of work and stuff like that. But you just have to wear these things. So there is always a cost. And I think it's even more so now. I mean, I spent many years out of the country, and especially working in the Caribbean, there is so much more of there's less hostility, let's put it that way. There's less hostility to the gospel. And most people are very churched, if I would say that. Wouldn't necessarily say that they're all believers, but they're definitely churched. And so in public forums and in certain settings, it's not unusual to have to pray, that people pray and ask God for things. Or even when I was dealing with some, government ministers that would say, I know you're a woman of faith, because I'm very clear about that when I work with people. What do you think God is saying at this time? I mean, and then to come back to the UK and find absolute hostility, and many believers hiding out. I think the first time I came back, I did a coaching, I was doing a coaching qualification to build on some of the things I was doing. And I got asked, what's your approach and methodology? And so, and they sort of went round the group and we shared. And I said, well, my approach and methodology, I said, really comes from Scripture these days. If it doesn't fit with that, then I'm not being authentic to myself or to the clients that I'm serving, because I believe there's something to offer. So I explained that and whatever else. And, I got several phone calls after that from people who said, that was so courageous of you, because we're people of faith and we would have never have admitted to that in any kind of a work forum. And it didn't even dawn on me to not admit to it. But as I stayed longer in the UK since coming back, I suddenly started to realize why they said that and the consequences of that, because they can be challenging.
Yeah. But you mentioned there that one of the things that you is very upfront about your motivations behind why you do what you do, that it does flow out of your faith. And so Why do you take that approach? Why is that something that you're very almost, that first time or in an interview even that you will say, I do this because I'm a follower of Jesus? Why do you take that approach when others perhaps wouldn't?
For me, one of the values that I've learned to really appreciate, we talk a lot about authenticity, but for me, what that means is that I have to show up in the fullness of who I am, who I'm created to be. We talk about, praise God because we're uniquely and wonderfully made. And so part of that being uniquely and wonderfully made is the way he's wired me and the calling he has on my life. And so that's why I choose to show up that way. And also, it's about framing expectations. So hopefully people will have an understanding that when I choose to do certain things or not do certain things, they will understand the context of that because I have already told you where my principles lie and where I'm coming from.
I love that thought of showing up in the fullness of who God has created you to be. I think that's a brilliant way to frame it. And it'd be interesting, wouldn't it, if that approach was perhaps more prevalent and more common, and the getting phone calls about, oh, we would never dare to do that was less common. What difference that might make perhaps in our workplaces and in wider culture as well at this time as well. Who knows? So can you talk about some of your, and maybe we've probably touched on some of these, I expect, in previous episodes, but can you talk about some of your non-negotiable values when it comes to leading and working with others? What do they look like for you?
I would say integrity is definitely one, and in its fullness. And we've talked about, what is integrity? It's to be integral. And it's one in particular that I've really had to navigate sort of what do I mean by that? And it might seem really obvious, but so the example that I get that, I wasn't prepared to do that, some of those things may seem very black and white, but there have been other times, for example, where I have been in, I've been in a work situation where there is somebody having an affair with somebody else, and they are not, and that's not their wife. And how do you navigate sort of standing in the gap in that situation and ensuring, because bearing in mind that you're at work and you're called to be at work to serve and everything else, and how do you navigate that happening, and whether or not that's it's right for you to take a view or to say something and speak into that situation. And over the years, I've come to realize that, and I think we've talked about this before, I can't expect people who don't know Jesus to operate to the standards of Jesus. However, don't expect me to align with your standards. So some of that has been around relationship and learning that if I'm in relationship and I build relationship, then I have the emotional currency to be able to have a conversation and to say, hey, not from a place of self-righteousness, that this is wrong, but from a place of, hey, you know what, this isn't the best thing for you or your family and the situation and whatever else. But you can only speak the truth in love if you know somebody and if you have that relationship. So for me, integrity looks like not just simply me honoring the values and being honest and open in my own dealings in terms of what I do. But if I'm going to, because we're to judge not unless we be judged, but if I'm going to speak to somebody else, I have to know that it's coming from a place of love and that it's going to be for their benefit and to do better, and do them some good versus just, this is, counter to what we would think, we believe as Christians. So navigating that one in particular has taken a long while, actually, to weigh it up. Because before I would just, weigh in there, this is wrong, it's morally wrong and all of this. But the issue is, in doing that, how does it help? The idea is that you want people to understand and change their behavior for their good, and so it has been a journey of, okay, let me come alongside people and explain how I see the world and why I don't think this is good. And especially in that particular situation, being able to say, let me share this with you. I mean, I did have the ability to speak into it because I have a relationship, but being able to speak as a child of a broken home and what that did as a child, and is that really what you want for your kids and for you, and what you're putting at risk for what often is a momentary thing. And to be very honest, having been in that situation, because I have done it, I've walked in adultery and I'm not proud of it, but again, prior to knowing Jesus, so being able to take that testimony and say, hey, let me share with you, rather than coming from a place of self-righteousness. And that's part of, for me, integrity. Being open and honest about my journey, the good and the bad, is also part of me walking integrity, is not just sort of being on my high horse and saying, oh, it's wrong and everything else, knowing full well that I've been in that position.
Yeah, and I think that's part of how Jesus works through us, isn't it?
Yep.
That he uses all of those experiences in our lives, both the good and the bad, as a witness to others.
Absolutely.
For how he works, that redemptive story that
Yeah.
he's able to weave through all of our mess and our muck and bring us out the other side. And to be able to use that story to help others is all part of the picture. And I love that. It's absolutely brilliant. So you talk about in your book a number of times about the challenge around feeling like you belong in the room. And again, we touched on some of this in our episode about imposter syndrome.
Yes.
But talk to me a little bit more about your personal experience of that. Maybe tell us one or two occasions where that showed up and how you kind of began to work through that and what that looked like for you.
It's really interesting because even at the time that I wrote the book, imposter syndrome wasn't sort of a big ticket item, and now you hear about it all the time. And what's really interesting is how many people actually, suffer from that, if you like. So many people, and especially aspiring leaders. And so, for me, the way it would often show up is, you're in a particular place, whether it's a meeting at work, whether it's, you're serving the community, and you just don't feel confident. You don't feel like you have the skills. You start to question, gosh, why am I here? Should I be here? And in particular for me, it's not something that I think necessarily just goes away once and for all. I think that as you grow as a leader and you get into more into different circumstances, and possibly even as you you become more elevated in your career, if that's the way of putting it, that you will always you have that oh gosh, second guessing, because it's no longer familiar and I'm in different circles. And in particular, as I started to work with government officials, I mean, the first time it happened, I remember, I couldn't even begin to fathom how I got in the room. That was the first thing. It was like, how did I get here? And one of the big things for me about navigating that is to always remember, because it's a calling, and I spend an inordinate amount of time asking Holy Spirit, is this the place that you want me? So jobs are not jobs anymore for me. They're very much about, okay, is this if this is my calling, is this the assignment that you've given me for this season? And so that's the way in which I choose a job. And so with that in mind, the way I've been able to navigate these things is by saying, okay, Holy Spirit, if this is the place that you've placed me and that, then I'm called to show up in, then you've got it. Even if I haven't, that you have. And what does that look like? There's an occasion, for example, when I was asked to speak at an event, and I wasn't a headliner, as it were. I mean, the fact that I was even speaking at the event, for me, it was in the US, was a real sort of like, oh my goodness. And I remember coming into the room and they'd asked, they said, we really enjoyed what you did. Would you actually chair a panel for us? And I said, yeah, that's great. I'd love to do that. So I walked into the room and I was supposed to meet with the panelists. All the bar one were men. And as I came in and sat down and started to say, well, I'm here to support the panel. I'm I don't think at the time I'd said I'm the chair of the panel. I said I'm here to support the panel, and everybody sort of so we just started, and everybody sort of started to go around the room. The speakers talking about well, I'm speaking on this and whatever else, and it became very obvious that they assumed that I was there to be the secretary. So can we give you our, sticks, and can you make sure that the computer... And I was like sitting there thinking, okay, did I miss something? Did they... Because, we've all got the sheet that says panelist, chair, da-da-da-da-da. And at one point, I stopped and said, let me just reframe. I said, I'm Felicia Lynch, so I'm your I'm the chair of the panel. I'm not here to be anybody's secretary. You're all very big people, and I'm sure that you can work out how to use a computer yourselves. I said, that's not my role. So I'm not taking notes here, and I'm not doing this because I think we're all capable of being able to remember what it is we need to do. And if not, I suggest you open up your phones and take notes. But it took a lot, for me to, because at the first instance, I was just stunned. It was like, really? I wouldn't have, the level of sort of, oh, you're the woman in the room, and obviously I'm not a headliner like any of them, so clearly I must be here to be doing administration. And it's things like that do make you think, oh, should I be in the room? But it's like, no, I am here, and I'm going to show up, and I am in the room. And so I was very respectful in the way I said it, but I told them anyway. And it does take time to do that. I can't say that when I was in my earlier years, if I'd have done that, I might have actually even sort of said, oh, I'm the chair, but no problem, I'll help out. Yeah. So you grow into it.
So there's all those assumptions that are going on in the room there that are kind of almost like reinforcing that voice in the back of your head that says, I shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
And you've got to find something to anchor onto in that moment. And for you, that has been that sense of being called into those positions.
Absolutely.
And I love what you said about that that experience being an ongoing one, because I think that's something that so many people are able to relate to.
Yeah.
Because you can move through your journey in life, can't you? Move through your career, through your experience of leadership from one table where you come in new, but over time you gain confidence, and then that influence grows, and the influence opens the door to the next room where it's a new table.
Exactly, where nobody knows you.
And you might not, no longer you the expert in the room.
Absolutely.
And then all of those things come back again. All those questions, all those little voices. Should you be here? They come flooding back in again. And so, yes, you need an anchor that will be able to hold you through each of those different rooms that you step into. Yeah. And there is no better anchor. No. There is no better anchor than God and a sense of being called, and knowing that that's where he's placed you as well. So that's fantastic. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the voices, the influencers, the mentors in your leadership journey? Maybe not necessarily who they were, but what was it that they did, said, or exampled to you that have helped you grow in your leadership journey?
I think they come in probably two categories: those that I actually knew and were up close and personal with, and those that I studied from afar or even read a book about, and helped me with my leadership journey. And for those that up close and personal, it starts right from the beginning, like we talked about when I was younger, and people, teachers and things being able to come over and say, hey, they were calling out the leadership in me, the leadership gifting that I didn't even see in myself. And that's been a big theme for me and again, that's another part around the imposter syndrome, is when you have good people around you who say, this is what I've seen in you, and will give you that feedback. But not just the good feedback, but will also love you enough to tell you when you're getting it wrong, and so to give you that developmental feedback, but not to just leave it there, but to say, let me walk alongside you because I see something in you and I'm going to help shape you and help grow this. And so I have been very blessed to have many people who've done that, who've either seen me and seen something in me and said, let me come alongside you, or seen me do something and done it really badly and said, I think you could do better and I'm going to come and show you how. And being open to that. And I will say this, some of the mentors that have been the most instrumental are the ones that called me on the stuff that I didn't do well, and then walked me through and discipled me, if you like, even when they weren't believers, through, to do it better and to grow in that skill or that area. And so we have to remain willing and teachable. Because I would not be who I am today if not for those corrections. And to take correction and feedback is a massive part of becoming a better leader.
Yeah, and we talked about, didn't we, the importance of humility and that sense of, like you say, of remaining teachable. And I think that's a lifelong posture.
It is.
I think if you're a leader, you're a learner. And I think it's so important that we hold that posture. And because there are good people around there who want to help us and who have a lot of wisdom that we can gain from.
Absolutely.
And we need to be able to receive that when it comes. And it doesn't always come with a pat on the back.
No, it doesn't.
And, you're doing a great job, carry on. I can definitely identify more often than not those who've moved me forward furthest would be the ones who pointed out the areas where I'm perhaps most deficient.
Yes.
And that's been helpful in kickstarting that process of growing. So that aside, because I think that's one great point, that let's stay humble, remain teachable, get ready to receive from those around us. What other advice would you give to young or aspiring leaders, people who are beginning their leadership journey, maybe stepping into a new career path, or are taking a different turn from somewhere they've been before and exploring something new? What would you give as a piece of advice to these people in that kind of situation?
I think the start for me would be sit with Holy Spirit. It's always, because Holy Spirit, that piece about feeling anchored is so important, because it then transcends everything that you go into. Because you will fail, you will mess up, we all do. But when you know that you're called and that that's the place that you're supposed to be, that you're walking in the appointed time, in the appointed season, and in the appointed place, it's what keeps you there, even through the difficult times. I've had some really difficult times in some of the roles that, I've come home and I've sobbed. But what has kept me there and kept me going, and this piece around, we talked about perseverance and endurance as some of the characteristics and the traits, is the fact that I know that this is what God has called me to. So I would say get that sorted first, get that straight first. And then the second thing I would say is embrace and enjoy the journey, because there is a lot, that you will meet along the way that is exciting and that you could never have imagined what God will do in you and through you and with you if you embrace it and if you yield to him. So that's what I'd say. And then on the practical side, I would say you just have to be open to learning and putting one foot in front of the other. It's feel the fear and do it anyway. Yeah. I read a book many years ago. I think it was Ilanya Van Sant, so I can't remember what. But it's feel the fear and do it anyway. And that has very much been my motto. Yeah. Even though you're afraid, go and do it anyway, Yeah, and we talked about the importance of courage, didn't we? Absolutely.
That's what we're talking about there, is that, yes, courage is, I that's scary, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Exactly.
And it takes a bit of courage, yeah. So can you talk to us a little bit about maybe some of the teams that you've been in through your leadership journey, teams that either you've led or teams that you've been part of, maybe somebody else has been leading. And can you talk to us about what the differences between the really great teams that you've been part of and some of the teams that perhaps weren't so great?
I'd say the first thing is, it's a real cliche, but they say there's no I in team. And that's the biggest one. The best teams, you will always start out with, it's that sort of forming, storming, norming piece. And it's a good thing to go through that. I think one of the things that leads to a poor team is when you don't allow that process to happen. So what happens is you try and bypass the storming, you try not to get into the conflict and not to deal with that. All you then get is a group of people that come together who have things that they really want to say that they don't, that they hide it, that they bury it, and it doesn't make for good relationships, and certainly not authentic relationships. So I would say the teams that I've been on that have not been the best are where that's been happening, and people have just stuffed stuff down, and we don't talk, we don't fight, everything is nice.
So this is I just want to pause here, because this is a really important point if you're ever in a team as part of a church.
Absolutely.
Because we are so prone in the church to growing that fruit that is not of the Spirit, which is the fruit of nice and polite. and
we think that's kindness.
It's not the same thing at all.
Yeah.
Not that we should be intentionally mean to each other, but loves one another well enough to tell the truth.
Yeah.
And what you said is so important. And so I just want to pause, but carry on.
Yeah. So that for me is one of the big things. And it's also an indicator for me when I'm as a leader that I've got a team that's in trouble, when they can't wrestle the hard things together, when they can't sit and talk and whatever else. And so for me, that piece has to be dealt with first before you can actually start to talk about, shared goals and working on something together, and, the collective being better than the individual. So that's the starting point. But some of the best teams are where there is good conflict, where we can say that to one another and we speak the truth in love, so with respect and dignity, but also where we have this shared vision, where we really do all come from that place of this is the goal or this is the thing we want to achieve, and we're all on board with that. Even though we may have different skills and different ways of doing it and different ideas about how to do it, but what anchors you is that this is what we're all working towards. Those are some of the best teams to work on, where you don't have dissenters, where everybody says, because of this being the goal, even if I didn't get my way in terms of the way we walk it out, because I care about the goal and I trust the team, then I'm going to go with it, even if my idea didn't get, it got burned and we're going to go with another one. But because I trust the vision and where we're going as a team collectively, I'm going to walk it out. And those are some of the best teams, because what you don't then get is the sabotage from within of somebody who's, I didn't agree with that, or this, that, and the other, because everybody is committed to the goal and the aim.
Yeah, and I think that, again, chimes back with one of the characteristics we pulled out in the previous episode, which is the servant-heartedness, isn't it? It's that sense of what I am serving, who I am serving is more important than me being served.
Being served, exactly.
And that sense of whether it's my way or another way that gets us there, what's important is getting there. And that's the most rewarding place to be when you're in a team as well, I think. When you're not in a place where you're fighting just to be recognized perhaps, or to have your own way.
Yes.
But when you together are building something that has real value and really makes an impact. I think that's fantastic. So in a minute we'll close with a quick fire round. But I just want to give you the opportunity to share anything that you think you'd love to share with everyone who's listening before we wrap up with that quick fire.
I think what I would share is that it really is a journey. We keep talking about that leadership is a journey, which means that there's no, there's no end point. There's no, final destination. I've made it or I've got it. And it's the piece that you said, that leaders are learners. They are. And, even at this stage where I may have been classed as a leader for over 20 odd years, I'm still learning, and each situation you go into is different. And so I would say give yourself the grace to be able to learn and to grow, and to continue to seek out those people who will be mentors, even when you think that you've gotten a certain way under your belt. That humility is really important, to always be seeking for people who know more than you or can do things differently and whatever else. But I would definitely say it's a journey, so give yourself grace, and you will mess up. We've talked about it in some of the episodes. Failure is a big part of being able to lead. If you don't fail or haven't failed, then it will impact your leadership, and not necessarily for the better, because you need to know what it feels like to fail and to not do it, and to be able to have the resilience to pick yourself up, go at it again, and to be honest about saying, I didn't do that really well, but hey, what do I learn from it? So it's the failing forward piece. So I would definitely say give yourself the grace and know that it's a journey, and that at every stage you're going to learn new and exciting things.
I would definitely say that if you are a leader who never fails, you will be a leader who nobody follows. I think failure is such an important part of leadership, and we did a whole episode on it, so you can go back and watch that episode if you haven't yet already. So quick fire finish then for you. So give us one word that describes leadership to you.
Humility.
And give us a book or a quote that changed the way you lead.
Oh, gosh. Quote, let me think. There are so many. I would... one of the books that really impacted me was Stephen Covey. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in particular, because what that book taught me was that you can be intentional about growing in your leadership. And it shifted me out of the nature-nurture piece. So that's what I would say.
Excellent. Okay, and finish this sentence. Leadership is?
Relationship.
And what's one myth? We'll leave it at this. What's one myth about leadership that you'd love to bust?
That it's special people that are called, because God calls so many people, that in particular, that it's, the special people at the front or whatever. No, God calls all of us to something. And it's just about, leaning in and hearing him as to what it is.
Fantastic. Well, it's been great to hear a little bit more about your story and just glean a little bit more from your experiences and your wisdom over the years of leading and learning and growing and being shaped by God in all of that. I think that's so powerful. Again, if you haven't yet got a copy of Felicia's book, The Invisible Leader, please do pick one up. You'll find some really great stories in there and some insightful thoughts as well to help you grow in your leadership as well. So we're going to take a break over summer. So we're not going to be here next month for our leadership podcast, but we'll be back in September for our next episode. And we really hope to see you there.